January 15, 1943, 16:42 hours, Rabaul, New Britain. The humid air above the Japanese forward base shimmered as a Mitsubishi A6M Zero cut across the clouds, its engine humming like a razor slicing the sky. On the tarmac below, 3 Japanese pilots stood with arms folded, watching an American reconnaissance photo being passed around. A blurry silhouette of a new U.S. Navy fighter with wings, curved downward like a broken bird. Lieutenant Saburo Sate squinted at the shape and scoffed. Kawata Tsubasa, strange wings, he muttered, tapping the grainy outline of the Vought F4U Corsair. It looks unstable. A toy. The others laughed with him. Rumors had already drifted across the Pacific. This new American plane bounced off carrier decks like a stone skipped across water. Too heavy. Too clumsy. Too unusual. A machine that had grounded itself before the Japanese even had to face it. Up above, the sun dipped low, slashing gold across the sea. A Zero glided in to land, its pilot sliding back the canopy with the lax confidence of a man who believed the skies belonged to him. Because they did, at least for now. But 600 miles to the southeast, on a muddy strip carved out of the jungles of the Solomon Islands, mechanics in sweat-soaked uniforms were finishing the final checks on an aircraft unlike any the Pacific had seen before. Its massive propeller loomed like a spinning guillotine. Its double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower of compressed fury, growled even while idle. And that unusual gull-wing. It wasn't a flaw, it was the key. A design born from necessity, lowering the landing gear without lengthening it, but also reducing drag just enough to give the Corsair a cruel advantage speed. Blistering, unforgiving speed. Men who had flown it in test runs whispered about what it could do. They spoke of dive angles that made stomachs twist, diving, of acceleration that felt like someone grabbing your flight harness, and a yanking you forward, of 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns that chewed through metal as if it were wet paper. And tomorrow morning, that monster would enter combat for the first time. Back in Rabaul, Sate leaned against his Zero's wing, watching the sun fade behind the ridgelines. He had survived Guadalcanal. He had outflown Wildcats. He had become an ace before turning 23. But as the warm evening wind carried the distant thrum of engines preparing for war, something, just for a moment, made him tilt his head. A sound. Low. Heavy. Not the slender, high-pitched whine of a Zero. He frowned. No one else seemed to notice. The laughter continued, echoing faintly across the airfield, because none of them knew what was coming. No one realized that the next time those strange wings appeared in the sky, they wouldn't be mocked. They would be feared. Tomorrow, everything would change. January 16, 1943, 05:58 hours, Russell Islands, Solomon Sea. Dawn arrived like a blade, sharp, fast, and blinding. Mist curled low over the jungle canopy as the first F4U Corsair rolled onto the primitive coral runway, its tires crunching over crushed shells and debris. The mechanics stepped back, covering their ears as the engine roared to life. Inside the cockpit, Marine Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh tightened his chin strap. He'd flown Wildcats. He'd fought tooth and nail over Guadalcanal's blood-stained skies. But this was something different. You could fear it. You could hear it. When he pushed the throttle forward, the whole aircraft vibrated with a promise. Just tell me where to go, and I'll tear through it. The tower crackled. Blue leader, you're clear for takeoff. Enemy reconnaissance spotted northbound. Zeros heading your way. Walsh eased the Corsair forward. The gull wings caught the rising sun, casting strange shadows across the ground. like some predatory bird stretching itself before the hunt. At 80 knots, the plane almost leapt off the runway on its own. At 150, it was climbing like a creature unleashed. Within minutes, the Corsairs were slicing through the morning haze, their propellers leaving spiraled scars in the clouds. Then, ahead of them, specks. 7890s approaching in a slow, confident V. Walsh's heartbeat steadied. There they were. The masters of the Pacific sky, Blue Squadron, hold formation. He ordered. Let them come. Below, the sea shimmered like hammered steel. In the distant stretch between sunlight and shadow, the Japanese formation began its descent. Inside the lead Zero, Lieutenant Sabara Sate leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Those silhouettes. Those wings. Was this the strange American fighter they had laughed about yesterday? He smirked. All the better. The Zeros broke formation first, sliding into a rising turn. One they had used to overwhelm slower American fighters countless times before. It was the maneuver that had defined their dominance. But Walsh didn't climb to counter. He dove. The Corsair dropped like a stone from heaven. The fuel rumbling in its tanks, wind screaming over the fuselage. For a split second, Sate stared in disbelief. No American fighter should accelerate like that. Walsh's finger tightened around the trigger. 6 Brownings erupted. A stream of white, hot tracers carved through the sky, smashing into the lead Zero before Sate's wingman even had time to shout a warning. The cockpit burst open like a flare. Wreckage spiraled toward the sea. 1 second. 1 kill. The Japanese formation scattered. Now there was no laughter, only shock. Sate yonked his Zero into a hard roll, the engine howling as he tried to climb away. But the Corsair was already behind him. The American plane didn't turn. It lunged, its massive propeller biting the air with murderous intent. Sate felt the hairs on his neck rise. What was this machine? Another burst. More tracers ripping past his canopy. He banked, dove, climbed. Anything to shake the American fighter glued to his tail. The Zero was agile, delicate, a dancer in the clouds. But the Corsair. It was a hammer. And hammers didn't dance. They smashed. Walsh lined up the shot. His breath fogged the inside of his mask. Just a little more. Then. Blue, leader, break. Too high at your 6. He pulled back instinctively, tracers clipping across his right wing. 2 Zeros dove from above, guns blazing. For the first time that morning, the sky became a storm of metal. Corsairs and Zeros twisted through the dawn light, wrens roaring as they spiraled into a deadly bullet. The jungle below flickered with shadows of passing aircraft. You could almost feel the wind clawing at your face, the vibration of gunfire hammering through the hull, the sharp smell of burning fuel drifting in the air. And in that chaos, Sate saw it. The Corsair wasn't just fast. It wasn't just powerful. It was hunting them. His squadron, men who had dominated every battlefield until this moment, were being torn apart one by one. His confidence cracked. Corps War. Bocana, this is impossible. But it wasn't. And Walsh, rolling inverted through a cloud of smoke, had one target left. The Japanese ace who had laughed the loudest. He dove after Sate. The chase began. 6.21 hours. 10 miles west of Vella La Vella. The sky burned with the rising sun, streaks of gold cutting across the chaos. Smoke trails twisted like torn ribbons, drifting down toward the restless sea. The early morning calm had been replaced with the thunder of engines and the echoing rattle of machine guns. Lieutenant Sabaro Sate plunged his Zero into a steep dive, the G-force pressing him deep into his seat. His eyes flicked over the altimeter. He was dropping fast. Too fast. But behind him, the Corsair stayed locked on. That shouldn't have been possible. Zeros out, turned and out, climbed everything the Americans flew. That was the rule, unbroken since Pearl Harbor. Yet now, in this impossible morning, the rule had been shattered by a machine with bent wings and an engine that roared like a wounded beast. Sate swallowed hard. He wasn't afraid of dying. Any Japanese pilot who flew these missions had already made peace with that. But fear wasn't the enemy. Losing control was. He glanced back. Walsh was closing in, the Corsair's massive propeller chewing the air, its wings flashing every time sunlight hit the metal. You could almost feel the hunger of the machine, the way it surged forward, the way it refused to let the Zero escape. 6. 50 cals glinted beneath the wings. Waiting to strike, Sate exhaled slowly through his mask. Fine. If this new American monster wanted a duel, he would give it one. He pulled his Zero into a sudden climb, flipping into a sharp, rolling turn known as the Immelmann half-twist. The maneuver was one the Zero excelled at. Lightweight frame, delicate controls, perfect for tight dogfights. For a moment, Walsh overshot. Sate snapped into firing position, tracers slicing the air. Takao! Fight! The rounds streaked past Walsh's cockpit, one grazing the Corsair's wingtip and sending a shower of sparks into the wind. The hit wasn't serious, but the message was clear. This wasn't going to be easy. The two planes spiraled upward, engines howling in murderous harmony. The air thinned. Clouds tore apart, under the force of their climb. For a heartbeat, they were silhouettes against the blinding sun. Two predators locked in a lethal dance. Then, Sate saw his moment. He cut the throttle, letting the Zero float for just a fraction of a second, slipping behind Walsh as the American shot past. It was brilliant, precise. The kind of move only an ace could pull off. The Zero's guns lined up perfectly. Sate squeezed the trigger. Nothing. A cold jolt ripped through him. Jam. He tried again. Still nothing. The guns were frozen. A mechanical failure. Rare, but not unheard of under high G loads. And that half-second of disbelief was all Walsh needed. The Corsair rolled, dove, and soared upward in a brutal arc, placing itself directly behind the Zero once again. This time at point-blank range. Walsh could see the rising sun glint across Sate's canopy. He could see the pilot's tense shoulders, the set of his jaw, even the tremor of desperation in his maneuvers. Blue leader. Came a voice over the radio, shaky but urgent. More bandits inbound from the northwest. You need to disengage! But Walsh didn't hear any of it. This had become personal. He steadied his aim, watching the crosshairs tighten around the Zero's fuselage. One burst. That's all it would take. Yet in that instant, something strange happened. Sate didn't run. He didn't dive. Didn't climb. Didn't attempt a last-second trick. He leveled out, flying straight and unwavering. A silent challenge. If he was going down, he would face his enemy head on, not twisting away like prey. Bushido in motion. Honor carved into the sky. Walsh hesitated, just long enough for the entire battle to shift. Because above them, barely visible in the glare, 3 new shapes were descending fast. More Zeros. The reinforcements Sate had prayed for. And they were diving straight toward the lone Corsair. Walsh's radio crackled with static and panic. Blue leader! Break now, break. Or you're done! He looked up. 3 streaks. 3 sets of guns. 1 decision. And the ace he was about to kill staring back at him. Walsh pulled the trigger. But something interrupted the shot. Something he couldn't see yet. Something that would transform this duel into a turning point of the entire Pacific Air War. 006 said 24 hours. Altitude 14,000 feet. The sky trembled as 3 fresh Zeros plunged out of the sun, their engines screaming like metal hawks diving for the kill. Walsh barely had time to bank right before the first burst of 7.700 maneuvers and tracers shredded past his canopy, snapping through empty air where his cockpit had been milliseconds earlier. The radio exploded with static and panicked voices. "Blue leader! Pull out!" "They're all over you!" But Walsh didn't pull out. He dropped the nose of the Corsair and let gravity take him. The world tilted. Clouds blurred. Wind hammered the fuselage. You could almost feel the force pushing him into the seat, hear the rattle of loose bolts vibrating inside the frame. The Corsair wasn't sleek like the Zero. Its armor groaned under stress, its engine snarled with raw rage. But that weight gave it something the Zero lacked, the ability to dive like a falling planet. Sate watched from above, stunned as the American fighter plunged far faster than a Zero could hope to follow without ripping its wings off. This machine didn't fear speed. It embraced it. But the pursuing Zeros, fresh, confident, unaware of what they were chasing, went after Walsh in a tight formation, believing they had him cornered. Their strategy had worked against every other American plane they had faced. Not today. Walsh leveled out just above the waves, the sea racing beneath him in a blur of silver and shadow. Spray whipped up behind the Corsair's tail as it skimmed mere feet above the water. Zero pilots were trained for agility, not suicidal low-altitude dives. And suddenly, the ocean was their enemy. 1 Zero broke formation, pulling up too fast. Diving. Another wavered, wings shuddering in the turbulent air. Only one stayed locked on, pushing its fragile frame to the limit. Walsh could feel the pressure lines forming across his helmet, sweat beading on his brow. Come on. Come on. He jerked the stick left, snapping the Corsair into a brutal brake turn. The G-force slammed into him like a punch to the ribs. The trailing Zero tried to follow. Its wingtip dip caught a pocket of turbulent air and snapped. The plane spiraled into the sea in a plume of white spray. Walsh didn't even look back. But above him, the 2 surviving Zeros were regrouping, and Sate was diving again, refusing to let the American escape. He forced his battered Zero into a punishing descent, vision tunneling as the G-load crushed him. His breath rasped inside his mask. This wasn't about pride now. It was about stopping this new demon before it spread across the Pacific. As he closed the gap, he saw it. The Corsair's gull wings glinting beneath the morning sun. That strange shape he had laughed at. Mocked. But now, it looked different. Not awkward. Not fragile. Predatory. The wings of an ambush predator, curving like talons, ready to strike. Walsh pulled the throttle back, feeling the Corsair climb sharply. The Zero behind him followed, but the difference in raw power became brutally clear. The Corsair surged upward, leaving Sate Zero straining, vibrating under the pressure. Higher, higher, the sky thinned. And then Walsh did something no American pilot had ever done successfully against a Zero in vertical combat. He went over the top. Full loop. The Corsair's weight, once mocked by engineers and pilots alike, became its secret weapon. Momentum. Sate didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. Walsh rolled out of the loop directly above him. The hunter and the hunted had switched places in an instant. Sate looked up. The Corsair filled his canopy, blotting out the sun. Walsh's gloved hand closed around the trigger. But, just as he fired, another shape streaked into view. Fast, unexpected, cutting across his line of fire. A fourth Zero. Where had it come from? Why hadn't anyone seen it? Tracers ripped past Walsh's left wing. Warning lights blinked red across the Corsair's cockpit. A line of bullets stitched across the fuselage, punching holes in the metal skin. The entire aircraft shuddered. Smoke began trailing from the engine cowling. Walsh felt the Corsair's power falter. Just a flicker. Just a heartbeat. But in aerial combat, a heartbeat was everything. Sate seized the moment. He banked hard, rolling out of Walsh's line of fire and diving low, disappearing into a streak of sunlight. The duel that should have ended in that instant turned into something far more dangerous. Because now, the tables had flipped once again. Walsh, the hunter, was suddenly crippled and surrounded. 3 Zeros closed in for the kill, and the Corsair, this new miracle of American engineering, was about to face the moment that would decide its reputation forever. Was it truly a sky-breaking monster, or just another American fighter about to fall flaming into the sea? Yo-6, 28 hours. Smoke trailing, altitude falling. The Corsair coughed like a wounded animal, engine sputtering as black smoke curled from the cowling. Walsh wrestled with the controls, feeling the stick grow heavier in his hands. The plane wasn't dying, not yet, but it was hurt, badly. A thin line of oil splattered across the canopy, shimmering in the sunlight like dark rain. Behind him, the 3 remaining Zeros closed in with predatory calm. This was how American fighters usually died, surrounded, out-turned, trapped in the Zero's deadly carousel. The Japanese formation spaced itself with clinical precision. 1 above, 1 below, 1 offset to the right, a kill box. Walsh exhaled through clenched teeth. So, that's the game. He nudged the throttle, testing the engine's response. Weak, sluggish, but alive. The ocean spread beneath him like a polished mirror. The sky above burned gold, and between those 2 vast worlds, 1 damaged Corsair hung suspended, its fate balancing on a knife edge. You could almost hear the pilot's heartbeat in the cockpit's confined space, louder than the failing engine. 1 wrong move, and the Pacific would swallow him whole. The lead Zero throttled forward for the finishing shot. Inside that cockpit sat Sate. His hands trembled slightly on the controls, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from disbelief, from the realization that this American plane had nearly killed him twice. But honor demanded he end this personally. He pressed the trigger, sending a tight burst of tracers slicing past Walsh's right wing. Not a miss. A warning. A message, I will finish you properly. Walsh wiped oil from his visor with the back of his glove, the smear distorting the horizon for a moment. The Corsair vibrated violently, its wounded engine snarling like a chained beast. Blue leader to squadron. He panted between breaths. Anyone still with me? Static. Then. I'm here, coming in, hold on. The voice was faint, nearly drowned by the engine noise. Corporal Horace Jordan. A rookie. Flying his first major combat mission. Walsh's stomach tightened. Negative, he barked. Stay out. This isn't your fight. But Jordan didn't answer. Because he couldn't. He was already diving toward the battle. 2 Corsairs, Walsh thought, glancing up through the canopy. Against 3 Zeros and 1 of us half dead. His fists tightened around the controls. He wasn't getting out of this by running. He leveled the damaged Corsair, turning its nose slightly toward the sun. If he could just drag the Zeros upward. Make them climb. Maybe he could use what little power remained to pull something desperate. Something insane. Because against Zeros, insane was the only thing that worked. Sate saw the maneuver forming and smirked. Euro 6:31 hours. The sky west of Kolombangara. Jordan's Corsair tore through the clouds like a blue comet, its wings slicing vapor trails behind it. His engine howled, full throttle, pushing the plane to the very edge of its limits. The rookie wasn't supposed to fight like this. Not yet, not alone, not against aces. But something had ignited inside him the moment he saw Walsh's crippled aircraft drowning in smoke. He wasn't just fighting. He was charging. The 3 Zeros spread apart again, but the formation wasn't as sharp now. The clean, practiced confidence of Imperial pilots had been replaced with something jagged, uncertain. They had expected another easy kill. Instead, they found themselves under attack by a pair of American fighters they should have crushed. Yet, here they were, dodging, weaving, breaking formation to avoid the Corsair's relentless aggression. And Sate, once the embodiment of calm precision, felt his breathing quicken. This wasn't how Americans fought. This wasn't how they were supposed to fly. These new machines, these pilots. They attacked like predators. They refused to die. Sate spun his Zero around to meet Jordan head-on. The sun framed both aircraft, painting them as burning streaks converging at terrifying speed. Jordan didn't back off. Not a bit. Both pilots opened fire at the same instant. 2 lines of tracers, white and red, crossed like swords in the sky. Walsh watched in horror. Jordan, break OF! Barek! Too late. They shot past inches apart, the shockwave rattling Jordan's Corsair so violently the wingtips flexed. A bullet tore through his left stabilizer. Another smashed his side window, spraying shards of plexiglass across the cockpit. He flinched but held the stick steady. Sate, too, felt his Zero jolt as a 50 Carl round punched through the right wing. Smoke trailed from the hole, a thin grey ribbon behind a suddenly wounded aircraft. He hissed sharply through his teeth. That was the moment, right there, that the balance shifted. 2 damaged fighters. Face to face. But only one of them was built to absorb punishment. The Zero was a paper dragon, agile, elegant, but fragile. The Corsair was a steel hammer built to survive hell. As Jordan leveled out, coughing through the smoke in his cockpit, Walsh regained altitude behind him. His wounded Corsair limped through the air, but it was still alive, still dangerous. The 2 American fighters drew together, like wolves regrouping for the kill, and now the Zeros had a choicey fight. Or flee. One wingman broke first. He turned sharply away from the battle, climbing toward the distant safety of Rabaul. Damaged or not, he wanted out. The second hesitated, circling uncertainly. Sate cursed under his breath. Mador. Come back. But they didn't. The American rookies were supposed to run, not the Japanese aces. Walsh saw the formation collapse. He felt strength return, not to his plane, but to his purpose. He lined up behind the lingering wingman, ignoring the smoke, ignoring the shaking engine, ignoring the pain of each breath. His crosshairs drifted over the Zero's tail. One squeeze. A single burst of fire lit the air. The Zero erupted into flames. A long, trailing arc of burning wreckage that cut across the morning sky, before crashing into the sea. Jordan let out a shaky breath. You got him, you actually got him. But there was no time for relief. Because Sate wasn't running. And he wasn't hesitating. He dove straight toward the Corsairs. Not with confidence, not with superiority, with fury. He would either kill these Americans or die proving he wasn't afraid of them. The remaining Zero plunged into a high-speed merge with Jordan, the two planes weaving past each other so closely their wingtips nearly kissed. Walsh tried to climb up and join, but his damaged engine sputtered, coughing hard enough to shake him in his seat. "Come on, not now, stay with me." The engine protested with a screech of metal, grinding against metal. Jordan and Sate spiraled downward together, locked in a turning fight that neither could abandon. The Zero was lighter, sharper, more agile, but the Corsair had firepower and momentum on its side. At the heart of their duel, something more than combat echoed: two young men, each refusing to let the other dominate the sky. Jordan gritted his teeth. Sate's maneuvers were too clean, too precise, too deadly. He felt pressure closing around him like a tightening fist. The Zero slipped behind him. Closer. Closer. Walsh's voice broke through the radio with a mix of command and desperation. "Jordan, roll! Now!" Jordan slammed the stick left, flipping the Corsair into a barrel roll so sudden he nearly blacked out. The Zero fired, tracers cutting the space where he'd been a split second before. But the maneuver cost him altitude. He dropped. Sate stayed on him. The spiral tightened. Gravity screamed. The ocean rushed closer. Two aircraft locked together in a death spiral. And, at that altitude, physics would choose who lived. Walsh tried to dive to help, but his engine failed again. Choking on smoke, he could only watch. The sea rose up beneath them. Waves flashed white. There was no time left. Jordan's voice came through the radio. Young, scared, but resolute. "Lieutenant, if he wants me, he's going to have to follow me all the way down." Then he did something insane. He cut the throttle. Both planes dropped like stones. Sate blinked. "Nani? What is he?" Jordan waited, and then, at the last possible second, he pulled up. The Corsair leveled out, skimming the waves just above the surface. But Sate, his Zero was too light, too fragile, too fast in descent. He tried to pull up, hard. The Zero shuddered. Wings flexed, screamed, and then, crack, a wing fractured. The Zero cartwheeled into the ocean, exploding in a white and orange bloom of fire and sea water. Walsh exhaled, a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Jordan didn't celebrate. He barely breathed. He just flew straight, staring forward, hands shaking on the controls. The sky went quiet, and at that moment the legend of the F4U Corsair was born. Not in a factory, not in a newspaper, but in the stunned silence of Japanese pilots who realized their era of dominance was ending. Jo Dan Janai. Don't joke with me. A climbing contest, against Zeros, arrogant, foolish. He ordered the two wingmen to fan out, trapping the Corsair between three converging lines of fire. They rose together, sunlight flashing off their wings. Walsh held steady. Closer, closer. Right when the kill shot lined up, he yanked the Corsair into a sudden snap roll, one so violent the entire frame groaned. Oil splattered sideways. The plane lurched, barely holding together. The Zeros overshot. For a split second, all three passed in front of him. Walsh lifted his shaking hand to the trigger, ready to fire. But the engine sputtered again, nearly stalling. The moment vanished, and the Zeros regrouped. Sate pulled his fighter around, settling once more behind Walsh. His voice was steady, calm, almost regretful. "It's over." Maybe it was. Then, out of nowhere, a streak of blue tore upward from the sea haze below. A Corsair, full speed, guns blazing. Jordan. GT OFF, he I am. The rookie screamed into the radio, his voice cracking with terror and fury. His tracers ripped across the sky like white lightning. Sate jerked his stick hard right, barely dodging the incoming fire. His 2 wingmen scattered. The kill box dissolved instantly. Jordan flew past Walsh, climbing like a bullet, the roar of his engine echoing across the clouds. But he wasn't done. He looped. Over the top, diving straight at Sate. The Japanese ace pulled up sharply, the Zero groaning under the sudden maneuver, the 2 planes slicing past each other, with only feet to spare. Walsh stared, stunned. The rookie wasn't just brave, he was reckless, fearless, dangerous. And as Jordan came around for another pass, something else shifted in the battle, something subtle but undeniable. The Zeros were no longer hunting, they were reacting. The Corsairs, damaged, outnumbered, desperate, were dictating the fight. Walsh wiped more oil from his visor, steadied his grip, and prepared the battered aircraft for one more climb. Because now, something had changed. For the first time in the entire Pacific War, the Japanese pilots weren't looking at an American fighter with contempt. They were looking at it with something far more powerful. Fear.